As we saw before on the previous news, Pak Yose, China has taken the spotlight a few times, even before the summit itself, during this year's G20 summit, holding cordial face-to-face meetings with many key global leaders. How will this affect China's global stance and relationship with the world, especially its trade, business, and economic relationships, which has been strained in recent years, Pak Yose?
Yeah, as we know that for the last several years, perhaps even more than 5 years, China already engaged with some kind of competitions, especially with so-called Western countries, with the U.S. and here in these regions. More importantly, they already engaged with some kind of trade dispute for 4 years with Australia. And that kind of things do not really provide us with good pictures of the future, right? The economy needs stability, and stability cannot be achieved if major powers such as China or the U.S. Come into a rivalry like this. So this is a really a good development for global economy, for global situations in general, that finally the U.S. presidents meet the Chinese leader and then have an honest talk among them, a very sincere one in my opinion, and came up with some kind of understanding. Of course, it doesn't really mean that it would solve anything, it would solve everything, but at least these common understandings would be a good basis for better engagements in the future. They might be engaged in some kind of competitions, for sure, strategic competition even, but hopefully these competitions would not be turned into rivalry, or even more dangerous open conflict.
Okay, that's one meeting that maybe is still being talked about even after the G20
yes,
summit
of course,
ends
it
in
has
Bali.
To be continued.
Yeah, and then let's go back to Indonesia's G20 presidency. Indonesia pledged to help developing countries, Pak Yose, this year. That included debt restructuring assistance. How do you assess Indonesia's G20 presidency's role in helping developing and vulnerable countries?
Well, G20 itself also already have this kind of debt suspensions initiative. It was introduced during the COVID pandemic, earlier stage of COVID pandemic, and this debt service suspension initiative already is coming to an end this year. So G20 has to come up with the new mechanisms. And I think the G20 under Indonesia's presidency, G20 managed to come up with new mechanisms, although it is still limited to several less developed countries, low-income countries. Only 3 countries, in my understandings, already take up this opportunity. Which is Chad, Zambia, and another one Ethiopia. They already comes under these new mechanisms. Hopefully, many more low-income countries would also join this new initiative. The thing is, the current situation is a bit worrying. More than 60% of low-income countries are actually at the high risk of not having capacity to pay for their debt, or they already have some difficulties to pay their debt services. So this is going to be worrying, not for the global economy, for sure, because their debt is just a small percentage, a very minor percentage compared to the international debt situations. But of course, we're dealing with hundreds of millions of people who would suffer from these situations, and their government can no longer serve the people or provide necessary things for their people.
Now, on the hot topic that being, a conversation the last few months, Pak Yose, IMF and World Bank predicted a recession happening next year. Do you believe that G20 forums this year, especially the FMCBG meetings, have better prepared countries to prepare for a global downturn?
Well, the thing is, actually, when the Indonesia's presidency started last year, we are all hopeful. We were hopeful that the economic recovery would go on well this year, and then suddenly the war happens. It shattered any hope actually, but. This year, Indonesia's presidency actually proposed to have some kind of the things what they call concerted strategy for exit strategy from the pandemic. During the pandemic, the countries actually spend a lot of money. The government spend a lot of money, so their fiscal becomes very high. At one point in time, after the pandemic, during the recovery, they have to withdraw the money again. They have to withdraw the liquidity that currently being circulated in their economy. But it has to be done concertedly. It has to be done together, synchronous, in how do you call this? In synchronization. But the thing is, the war really make this plan to have a concerted policy settled, because the many economies basically faced by the reality of inflation went very high, and no longer under control. Food security, food price and energy price went astronomically. So they have to start tightening their liquidity.
Okay, unfortunately, we have a limited amount of time. Pak Yose, the last question. In short, how do you think G20 presidency this year will be remembered in years forward?
I think this year would be remembered as one of big achievements for G20, because everybody, including me, was also quite skeptical about G20's. Even on the G20's existence, because the war basically changed everything. They changed how the countries perceive cooperation. But it turns out that Indonesia managed to keep, not only to keep the G20 together, but also managed to deliver a good result.
From skeptical to optimism. Thank you very much, Pak Yose, for your time. Let's hope for the best output after this G20 presidency in Bali.